staking Bitcoin a year ago, people would, say that's crazy. But, I would always like counter and say like, billions and billions of Bitcoin were given to centralized entities like promising 8%, right? So like, there's a target market that, probably still desires that, but they don't want to get wrecked in the same way.
Welcome back to another episode of the Talking Intentionally podcast. This week we're speaking with Babylon. Babylon is one of the teams that actually is really fascinating in this space because they actually help you earn yield on your Bitcoin. One of the big things that we have felt and experienced when we started our, Axel Yield platform is how many people are interested in earning yield on Bitcoin. It's this you know, philosopher's stone or great north star that a lot of people are chasing. And I think in that regard it's really cool to speak with the Babylon team and understand where they're getting Bitcoin yield from and why it's important, and down the line how Axel will be able to get people who are holding Bitcoin yield on their Bitcoin so their money is always earning for them. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and as always, please feel free to leave comments in the section below on either X or YouTube, and we'll be sure to read it and take your feedback to heart. Take care. Bye. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Talking Intentionally. Today we have Ash and Clayton, and we're going to talk a little bit about staking and staking on Bitcoin and Clayton's journey into crypto. So without any further ado, would love to just hand it off to Clayton and hear like what was your trajectory into getting into crypto? Was there something in particular that drew you to it? Yeah, would love to learn more.
Yeah, nice to be here. I'm the head of BD at Babylon. I've been working professionally in crypto for over 4 years, but discovered crypto in college in like 2013 on weird websites back in the day, but didn't really get super involved in, you know, its benefits for like the broader world until around like 2018 or 2019, once Ethereum started coming into play and smart contracts, et cetera. And yeah, I got my start working at Figment, which is an institutional staking provider. I was also a partner at Figment Capital for a bit and spent a lot of time on the LRT and restaking side of things with EigenLayer. And now I'm full-time at Babylon, which is a Bitcoin staking protocol. So pretty much my entire professional life has been centered around staking. So like blockchain security, but then also, building DeFi primitives on top of that in the form of LSTs or LRTs. Nice to be here.
So yeah, I'm gonna just go very high level. What is staking? Why is it so important for crypto? How does it compare to other forms of interest or just like revenue generation on assets that you see in like traditional finance?
Yeah, and using my words, um, smartly here, but I mean, most people would consider it like the risk-free rate of crypto. Some people may not define it as such, but essentially it's something that's almost guaranteed with some penalties attached to it, depending on if you're delegating an asset to a malicious validator. But ultimately, if you're looking at proof of work versus proof of stake, instead of devoting energy to the blockchain to secure the network, you're devoting assets. So if I have 32 ETH, I can run infrastructure that gives me rights to produce blocks. And any block that I produce, I receive a block reward from that. So basically, it's replacing, compute power with financial assets.
What would incentivize someone to want to stake their assets in a crypto scheme? Like, I know that obviously I think if you spend some time in crypto, you see what the rates are and like they're pretty high.
Mhm.
What would make someone, I guess like watching this who isn't aware of, the average rate that you get in crypto? What are like the typical rates you can expect, and how would you know if something is too sus, or how would you recommend sussing out, like platforms that allow for staking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like staking has been used fairly broadly at the consensus layer and the application layer now. So it's good to distinguish between like protocol staking, so actually providing security to a blockchain, as opposed to like DeFi staking, right? If you put your asset in like a vault or something, you're likely receiving the same risk that you would receive, in an off-chain setting associated with like lending or having counterparty risks, things like that. If looking at protocol staking, which what we built for Bitcoin, or looking at delegating Sol or ETH to a validator on Ethereum or Solana. Really, the one thing that you have to look out for is the validator performance. So is it you know it is the hardware actively running? Is it not double signing blocks? If that doesn't happen, you're generally pretty good. So it's ultimately a fairly passive experience for most people that are staking assets on chain currently today. Um, in terms of the rate, it can vary fairly widely depending on what blockchain you're staking on. But it's generally in the range of like 2 to 10%. That being said, if you do liquid stake, which is, taking a stake position and receiving a receipt token on top of that, you can use that token for additional yield generating opportunities like at the DeFi layer as well.
Just like a quick follow-up on what Jacob was talking about, like worst case scenario for a user. So with you on like the app layer staking of things is very different from like protocol levels of staking. But when you mentioned stuff like not double signing blocks, like validators connected, like actively doing stuff, it's like what is the worst case scenario? So if I've delegated, let's say like 1 Bitcoin towards some validator via like Babylon or some other piece of infrastructure, like what scenarios are there for me potentially losing that? I think that'd be good to really flesh out.
Yeah, so with Babylon, it's fairly minimal. I think if you do commit a double signing event right now, it's 2.5% of your stake gets slashed. So if I have 1 Bitcoin, I would have 97.5% of that Bitcoin if I delegate to a malicious validator. Some protocols, it's 100%. Some protocols have correlated slashing. So Ethereum, for example, right? If one validator gets slashed, it's 1 ETH. If, say, 33% of Ethereum validators get slashed at the same time, it increases exponentially, right? So basically, it's a design that some blockchains will have in place to mitigate against like, a catastrophic like, takeover of the entire blockchain. But like Solana, for example, I don't think they even have slashing in place right now, or Sui or Aptos. So it depends on the blockchain, which makes it a little bit complicated, but it's basically the main parameters you want to look for when staking is what is the reward rate and what are the risks, and the risks are generally associated with slashing.
Sorry, and like final thing on this line of reasoning, what do you think endgame is? Like, yeah, Solana slashing maybe not in place, so it's like endgame for Babylon or Solana or like any blockchain, and maybe this is very use case dependent, so we could also just isolate it to Bitcoin only. Let's say, like, what is the exact amount? Like, is 2.5% endgame? Is like complete slashing of validator endgame? And how do you kind of think through that trade off? Yeah.
I mean, it's all like game theory at the end of the day. I mean, I don't think we've really seen like a catastrophic, slashing event at scale yet. I also don't think we've seen like any sort of like, you know, large malicious takeover of a protocol, by buying a bunch of tokens and staking them and trying to, fork the protocol. So we don't really know what the best slashing design is, right? So like really like slashing is to mitigate against like that, nuclear bomb sort of scenario. That being said, I think from an end user perspective, right, like, if the native token is only used for staking, and there isn't a liquid staking token that's available for DeFi, you're really not going to have this like moneyness for like the baseline asset, right? If all of the assets are staked. Vitalik would talk about this for Ethereum. Solana would, and Anatoly would talk about this as well. So obviously having a liquid staking token in place like poses additional risk, right? But competing for DeFi yields versus competing for like the baseline staking yields. It's like I'm more of the opinion that you should find a appropriate way to combine the two and not have the actors be different.
Kind of zooming out and going a little bit more into like Babylon specific. Love
Mhm.
to hear like why did you choose to join Babylon? And I guess like obviously Bitcoin staking is probably a little bit different than staking for like pretty much every other token in crypto, or
Mhm.
coin in crypto. So do you mind talking a little bit about why Bitcoin staking is unique and what brought you to Babylon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unique because of my opinion on having these positions more liquid and in the DeFi space, right? Like there's not a lot you can do on the Bitcoin network outside of send receive. So outside of creating, making Bitcoin as an asset stakeable natively on the Bitcoin network, people are also leveraging that stake position as a way to lock that and then represent that stake position on other ecosystems that have more expressivity outside of, Bitcoin. Um, so we've designed our staking function in a way that feels very much familiar to a delegated proof of stake network. So like, if you're staking something on Solana or Sui, for example, the experience would be relatively the same. The Bitcoin doesn't leave your wallet. There's no bridging, no pegging. You're basically submitting a UTXO transaction and connecting your wallet address to a validator's wallet address as well. So you're being exposed to the risk reward parameters of that what we're calling finality providers on Babylon. Um, so the experience is similar, but I think what's interesting about it is it does go beyond just providing security to other blockchains because of this like locking function that offers you to like the ability to represent that asset elsewhere, with the ultimate goal of getting more Bitcoin activity on chain, right? If you're looking at DeFi trading volume versus sex volume, like for every other asset besides Bitcoin, it is steadily growing. I think you've only seen that grow at like a interesting scale over the past year because of the amount of like liquid BTC that's getting put into these ecosystems, whether it's CBBTC or a lot of these Babylon LSTs that exist today.
So also just tie off the nod about like why did you join Babylon? Like what was the personal interest there? Yeah.
It's the largest, most decentralized, like used asset in the space for like a wide range of people globally, right? So if you can add more utility to that, I think um, it's a very interesting use case to build for Bitcoin, right? Like most activity in terms of like the quote unquote like financialization of Bitcoin, right? Like who makes money off that? It's only private companies for the most part because there's no place to actively trade it at scale. So the goal is to bring this value back to decentralized you know protocols and ecosystems and ultimately end users who benefit from this activity.
So, I used to write for Bitcoin Magazine, honestly, like now 2 years ago. Uh,
Mm,
the profile of character who's a of a Bitcoin maxi or a Bitcoin person is so
mhm.
different than I feel like, honestly, the broader ecosystem of crypto. In fact, you weren't allowed to even use the word crypto nor like talk about other projects while, I was working there. Um, so I'd like to know, like, what is the kind of like profile of character of person who's interested in Bitcoin staking? Like, I feel like some of the maxis would be like it's already kind of like a little haram. It's like already a little removed from like what the purpose of Bitcoin is. But like, have you noticed that like the OGs in crypto are like receptive because they want to earn, yield uh on their Bitcoin, or have you noticed like there's pushback or just like to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for one, you're not going to please everyone, and you're especially not going to please everyone when you're doing this new thing for the first time. That being said, I think if you're looking at a lot of these Bitcoin L2s and things that we're doing, right, these maxis really do like the non-custodial nature of the thing that we built, right? So there are Bitcoin staking protocols that exist today. That does require some bridging, some, giving up rights to, your underlying Bitcoin to receive some APY. Um, Obviously, that happened in a centralized way with like BlockFi and Celsius, and everyone got wrecked. But the staking functionality that we have built, that Bitcoin never leaves your wallet. So it is like an attractive thing for, a maxi as long as they can, understand the risk reward profiles of that stake position. Because if they are planning on holding it for 10 years, you would want to earn, say like 2% on that a year, if you're able to. Um, But like, in general, I think we are targeting people that are mostly more interested in doing things beyond just the staking aspect as well, right? Like a lot of our TVL currently is in the form of LSTs, which is, beneficial for, the Babylon ecosystem because then we can tie in this security, offering to with liquidity as well, right? So like, we can incentivize further Bitcoin activity if you, complete an integration, with the protocol. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think looking at the size of Bitcoin, you don't have like this like, one, group of people that are dictating, the asset. But in general, I think what we built, would work for most of those maxis.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great transition towards like I guess the final question focused on Babylon. What LSTs are you seeing that you're most excited about? Like what is kind of in like a big growth catalyst? Like and also like if you could talk a bit more about like those personas, like that's a very interesting persona. It's not the I want 2% of my Bitcoin each year. It's like there's something worthwhile in me going and putting my Bitcoin to work for this exact validation use case. So I think it'd be good for people to just get a sense, like literally what is it, right? Like what is this use case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a use case that's already been tested in centralized spaces, right? So, if we're talking about uh, staking Bitcoin a year ago, people would, say that's crazy. But, I would always like counter and say like, billions and billions of Bitcoin were given to centralized entities like promising 8%, right? So like, there's a target market that, probably still desires that, but they don't want to get wrecked in the same way. So how do you bring that on chain and all of these positions are verifiable? And there's, limited counterparty risk or at least like viewable counterparty risk that allows, both institutions and retail to make better decisions on, how they're like, receiving a reward rate on top of the Bitcoin that they're already actively holding. So, if you're looking at the LSTs that, exist on Babylon today, over time, there's likely going to be like, a high risk, low risk, for this group of people, for that group of people, actively targeting certain ecosystems or DeFi primitives that they want to build the asset on top of. So I think you'll see diversity there in the long run, but we have around like 10 to 12 LST issuers leveraging our staking protocol now, to issue assets on top of, which is exciting.
Yeah, that's sick. We can maybe wrap up with like a slight connection to Intense. Like I think at the product level, there's like a lot when it comes to just like people wanting to put money to work, not knowing exactly how to do that if you're holding Bitcoin. Is there a way for me to go and do that? At a super high level, this theme of like mitigating counterparty risk is something that we think about a lot. Like if I have a literal intent, some job that I want some competitive free market to go and solve for me, auction or some other mechanism finds you the counterparty. What guarantees do you have around the counterparty? Honestly, it kind of relates to the very first question. What are your thoughts if you think about like, and frankly, the work at Figment before like Babylon, like all this stuff probably lends into the answer here. It's like, how do you mitigate counterparty risk? That's why I'm in crypto. It's like you can leverage systems and have some level of like staking and slashing to help remove this. Certain things you limit the supply side too much, maybe by requiring too much collateral. This
Mhm.
2.5% versus something else is another conversation. So like, however you want to take that. Like if you think about staking as like a necessary foundation for broader use cases, like especially something like intense or very generalized market tasks. Like any thoughts around that, lessons learned, things to avoid? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we're definitely not going to limit the supply side at all. I mean, Ethereum was like kind of thinking about this as well, and I think it's silly to, tell people what they can and can't do with, an asset just because they didn't get in line first. Um, so yeah, we're not going to do that. I do think, if looking at intents and cross-chain, and where all this liquidity and like yield sources will exist long term, right? Like what y'all are building will be interesting because we don't necessarily envision all of this liquidity to be on the Ethereum base layer, right? It's going to be where people are willing to pay for it. And we're looking at Bitcoin as, kind of the most pristine collateral to exist in the space. Um, and we see people's willingness to pay, and they want this liquidity to be injected in their DeFi ecosystems, and that's people almost like decentralized proof of liquidity for Bitcoin, so to speak, and the what that requires is interoperability as well as people that are going to be building these intents and applications that are at least somewhat composable for execution layer A, B, C, D. And at any point in time when anyone's willing to pay, someone can, execute that order for an LST issuer.
Yeah, you got, or you made me think of like a final question that we could maybe wrap up on. Like when I think about like or when you think about like big users or big stakers on Babylon today, like what are their biggest frustrations? And is there a world where automation can help? Like even at a naive level, if I'm thinking about just the two pieces of criteria that you gave us earlier, like is this person not double signing blocks? And like is there what like they're online, like they're actively validating to an extent? Is there a way to like set up some automation that's maybe checking through a long list of possible like folks that you can go and stake with? And like do people already have this in place? I'm assuming if you're sophisticated, you do. Does retail, does Babylon offer this as a, like thoughts around like how to better improve the lives of like those users and what they struggle with today when you think about like big stakers or folks that really care here.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the type of staker, right? If it's an institutional person, they're asking like much more boring, simple questions that are very, very important. But if you're looking at how much you can like juice the reward rate of staking, right? It like the spread is in like bips. So I think the more um important thing when it's an end user making decision is like, what is happening at the DeFi layer, because that, becomes like, percentages as opposed to bips. But like, the risk, exponentially increases as well, depending on, who you're depositing, what vault you're depositing into and like, what bridges you're using, et cetera. Um, so really we're just creating like this baseline, staking rate and hoping that a lot of this comes into these ecosystems in the form of liquid staking tokens and then building like, Bitcoin DeFi ecosystems on top of that. Um, so yeah, I mean I don't think there's a lot that you need to consider on just the baseline staking side, but there is an element of trust with all of this stuff, which is trust your validator unless you want to run your own infrastructure.
No. So hey, very fun conversation. I have nothing else. Jacob, anything?
I guess just final question: where do you see yourself in Babylon? Like, I guess down the line, um,
Um,
like what does
for,
winning look like?
for Babylon.
Yeah,
I mean, I would love like 5% of Bitcoin to be staked through Babylon. That would get us to like the same amount in dollars as Ethereum base layer. Um, so that would be cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we're very confident in the security of our staking functionality that we built, and so we want as many people to use it as possible, right? And the goal is to get as much Bitcoin liquidity on chain, to benefit every single ecosystem that exists, as opposed to centralized actors.
sweet. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time to speak with us, and yeah, I hope you're well.